Sandi Norman. I'm with the Indiana State Board of Animal Health, and welcome to our Facebook Live chat today.
Hi, I'm Dr. Colleen Brady, and I'm a horse extension specialist with Purdue Extension. Today we are going to talk about strangles in horses, and we're also going to talk about biosecurity in general. One of the reasons we're doing this with Facebook Live is to give you an opportunity to ask us questions as we go along. So please feel free to submit them on our Facebook page. We actually have an assistant here who's going to help us with this, so as we kind of talk through strangles and biosecurity, we'll just pop in those questions as they come up. Dr. Norman, can you tell us a little bit about strangles?
Okay, so strangles is a bacterial disease that's caused by the bacteria Streptococcus equi. So it's a strep bacteria. It's an upper respiratory infection, so it's usually characterized by a nasal discharge and swelling in the lymph nodes. And the reason it's called strangles, its name comes from the fact that sometimes those lymph nodes would swell so much it would affect the breathing, and sometimes they get stridor from that, or dysphagia. In other words, they have trouble swallowing. So that's why it's called strangles, but it's actually a bacterial disease that is upper respiratory. In rare cases, it can spread from those lymph nodes to other lymph nodes of the body, but that's very uncommon.
So where would a person find the lymph nodes? Where would they look to see if their horse's lymph nodes are swollen?
Okay, so the lymph nodes are under the neck, where the neck meets the head, and they usually see swelling in those. There's a number of lymph nodes. There's lymph nodes in your mandible, and there's lymph nodes down your neck, all the way, and lymph nodes drain every part of the body. But generally we see them somewhere between the head and the neck, between the mandibular lymph nodes, all the way down to some of the thoracic lymph nodes from time we swell up. But you can see them because they will usually swell up enough for you to notice them where the head meets the neck.
Okay, so it might be a good idea if people are concerned to, when you're haltering your horse or bridling your horse, kind of get a good idea of what their throat latch usually looks like. So if there gets to be some swelling there, you might notice that.
Yeah, you should always know what the normal is on your horse, so that way you know when it's abnormal.
So I know that Board of Animal Health stresses biosecurity all the time, but what preventive steps does BOAH recommend for horse owners when they're traveling to shows and other events?
So we would like a horse, of course, before they start going to shows, to be a healthy horse, because we know that a healthy horse is more likely not to get sick. If your horse is healthy, so your veterinarian should come out and do a checkup and give them an appropriate vaccinations so they can protect against as many diseases as we can, okay? And then also do the proper testing, EIA testing. And of course 4-H has requirements, and you have to meet those requirements for shows, and then you should ask your show if there are other requirements. The other thing that you need to do is you need to have your own equipment, and it needs to be clean, because the way this gets transmitted is not only from horse to horse, but with contaminated equipment. So make sure that you have all of your own equipment, your bridle, your brush, your comb, your lead, all your equipment, and it's yours and used just for your horse, and that you clean it in between uses. And then the other thing is just to be careful that make sure your trailer is clean, make sure if you're sharing stuff with horses, everybody has their own stuff. So those are biosecurity tips to start before you start into the show season.
And so how would you clean it? Do you think like with a bleach solution?
Yeah, 1 to 10 bleach solution works really good. That's just a couple cups of bleach and a gallon of water, and that cleans most infectious disease, not just strangles, but other infectious disease things. That should kill off most things that you run into.
Okay, that's great.
Mm-hmm. So what is Purdue Extension recommending for protective measures during events like 4-H shows and other fairs? There's a lot of events that are going on, judging events, different things, small shows, big shows. So what does 4-H Extension recommend for its participants?
Well, one really important thing that you talked about is vaccination. And the reason that we do have those requirements for vaccination is exactly what Dr. Norman talked about. It's the best way to protect your horse from disease really is to have it vaccinated for those that might impact it. One thing we really recommend is get your vaccinations now, and if you haven't already, don't wait till right before the county fair, because every time you commingle horses together, you bring them together, you're exposing them to disease. So as soon as you start having riding nights and going on trail rides and going to open shows, you're exposing. And some people don't vaccinate until you get really close to the fair, and there's two problems there. They've already been exposed potentially. Plus, it takes a little while for the horse's body to respond, and especially to some of our bacterial vaccines like strangles, that if you don't get them vaccinated early in the spring, they might not be covered when you first start going to shows and mingling with others people. And really work with your veterinarian about what's a good plan for your horse. The vaccination requirements from 4-H are kind of minimal vaccines. I know my personal horse gets vaccinated for all of those things plus several others because of where we go, the numbers of shows we go to, his age, the number of horses we have on the property, the horses coming in and out, all of those other factors that a veterinarian will help you determine what's best for your horse. And then as exhibitors, be really conscientious about not taking your horse if they're sick. And for anybody that's running a show, whether it's a show volunteer or a show manager at another type of show, if horses are sick, if they come off the trailer and they have swollen lymph nodes, they have nasal discharge, they're coughing and they're sneezing, it's a really difficult decision to make, but you really need to help those people make the decision those horses need to go home. And that's actually a state regulation from the Board of Animal Health, is that any animal with a communicable disease cannot show.
It's in our general requirements for exhibition. And that's a good thing. If your horse is sick, just stay home. One is you got to let the horse heal, so you want him to get better. If you put him on a trailer and you drag him, he's just going to get worse. And then number two, he's going to expose all the other horses at the event. So it's really better for you to stay home for 1 or 2 weeks, have your horse get better, and then he's healthier and can go on to other shows. Because there are a lot of shows and events you can go to. Because you miss a couple, doesn't leave your horse out of the mix. It actually gets him healthy so he can go on and do shows and events in the future.
Right, and that's really one of the most important things, that we want young people to learn being part of the 4-H program, is about how to take good care of their animals. And part of taking good care of your animal is not to take it to a show when it's sick, just like people shouldn't go to work when they're sick, or children shouldn't go to school when they're sick, because not only do they expose others, but they also don't heal as well. And then just to reemphasize what Dr. Norman said about cleanliness and cleaning your trailer. If you're hosting a show, you can get sprayers that you can put bleach in and bleach water, and you can spray your barns and your facilities. Make sure that people clean them. If you're providing wheelbarrows for people to clean the stalls and stuff at a venue, make sure those are cleaned between venues, because manure and the cleanings out of the stall is one place that any type of bacteria or something else that causes disease could hide. So cleanliness and sanitation really are huge in helping to prevent diseases. But unfortunately, sometimes no matter what we do, exposures happen. Sometimes we don't find out till after the fact. We've already gotten home and somebody didn't even know their horse was sick, but it got sick after the fact. Do you have any advice as a veterinarian as how would somebody handle that if you found out later that a horse was sick where I had my horse?
And that's very common, because once you get strangles, it can be 3 to 14 days before you show signs. So that's very common for them to go there. So one thing you want to do is, of course, you want to have your veterinarian pay attention and make sure they're dealing with, because sometimes it's not strangles, sometimes it's something else. So you should always have your veterinarian out and find out what it is. You want to call the show and find out if there are other sick horses at the show, because that's something that we need to know. If there was another sick horse there, you can say, well, my horse is ill too. You want to share information. You don't want to hide it, because if you hide it, then the disease just spreads more and more. So we want you to be honest and just say, well, my horse is ill, and and this is what we think it has. And he might say, we had a couple other horses get sick. So it's just good to share information so that everybody knows. And if everybody stays home and gets better, and then go back to the shows. The other thing you can do is the person that had the event wants to know that, because if for some reason she has a series of sick horses, she may want to take some additional disinfection steps at the venue to make sure that she got rid of whatever is causing the problem.
So strangles, one thing we talked about before, is strangles is a non-reportable disease, which means the show isn't required to call the Board of Animal Health and tell them. Or if a veterinarian comes to my farm and my horse has strangles, they're not required to tell you that. Can you explain that and why, what it means to be a reportable disease, and how you decide which ones are and which ones aren't? Yeah,
it's not reportable because it's a very widespread disease. It's you can probably culture it off of lots of stables or horses or things like that. So it's a very widespread disease. It doesn't cause a severe sickness. In other words, most horses recover. Very rarely does it spread throughout the body, and we frequently don't treat it because they recover spontaneously. It doesn't affect other species, and it doesn't affect people. So we can't make it reportable because it is so widespread. So in that case, we depend on horse owners being good horsemen. you know, to understand that when their horse is sick, it should not travel, they should report these things, and that if everybody stays home, then we don't get spread of the disease. But it does happen, so in that case, we want to make sure that we minimize the exposure of other horses. But we don't make it reportable because it's just too widespread for us to make that a reportable disease, and it doesn't have severe consequences.
So if I'm a horse owner and my horse does look like it has signs and he has swollen lymph nodes, how do I decide when do I need to call a vet? Or is this something that they are just going to get over on their own? What kind of symptoms do I look for to make that decision?
If you have a temperature over 102, you should call your veterinarian.
No matter what?
No matter what, you should call them, because it may not be Strangles. Swollen lymph nodes can be indicative of other diseases too, because lymph nodes swell anytime there's kind of an inflammation or infection. So if you have a temperature above 102, you should always call your veterinarian. And he may say, this looks like Strangles, and especially if the temperature stays up. So what we tell people who they think they've been exposed to Strangles is to temperature their horse twice a day, in the morning and at night. And horses are usually fairly easy to get a temperature on. And if you don't know how to do that, you should talk to your veterinarian. It's something you can do to monitor your horse's temperature. So that's one of the things we do when stables have been exposed. We tell you to monitor the temperature of all the horses in the stable.
Okay. Well, do we have any, if you're out there and you have any more questions, please let us know. And if not, we'll just say thanks for tuning in today. This video will be online for later viewing, so you can share it with anybody you'd like. And although we talked a lot about Strangles today, I am going to ask Dr. Norman just to touch briefly on what other kinds of respiratory diseases might we be most concerned about as we're starting to have these horses travel?
Okay, so we're very concerned about herpes virus, and there's a vaccine for the respiratory form of rhino, but we're very concerned about equine herpes virus neurologic. We're very concerned about that because that can cause a neurologic disease that can be fatal. So we ask you to vaccinate your horse. We know the vaccine doesn't necessarily protect against it, but we know that good immunity can keep a horse from getting what we call EHV1 or EHN, equine herpes virus myeloencephalation. That's just a neurologic form of, so we're very concerned about that in particular. That's something that we've had break at certain equine events.
And now that's the one that they've had to close shows for, isn't it?
Yes, that's the one they've had to close shows.
Quarantine
Yes,
and those sorts of things.
And they've quarantined at racetracks and things like that also.
How is that decision made? I know I've had a couple people call and say, well, are we going to quarantine horses from the state fair because of Strangles or some of these diseases?
Yeah.
How do we decide when to quarantine or when to cancel an event?
Okay, so the Board of Animal Health quarantines for certain diseases, those reportable diseases, that short list of very high impactful diseases. When we talk about disease outbreak like that, it's usually a group decision. For example, if it was something at a fair, it would be between Purdue Extension and the 4-H and the Board of Animal Health, and we would talk about the individual situation. Or when we're at a racetrack, we talk to the Horse Racing Commission, the management of the track, and the Board of Animal Health. And so that's when we make a decision that in the best interest of the activity that's going on and the disease that's involved, we should quarantine for a period of time. We do have guidelines for quarantine, but just because we have a reportable disease doesn't always mean that we quarantine. But we look at the situation. A lot of times we put out precautions and tell people we're worried about this. Or there might be certain horses we think we're more exposed than others, so we might limit their activity. So it tends to be a group decision. It's not a one-person decision, but it's a group decision talking about the event that's going on and the activity that's happening and the horses that are coming in. We're always very concerned about state and county fairs where there's large numbers of horses, and just like when you get large numbers of people together, there's risk of disease. When you get large numbers of horses together, there's risk. So the bigger the event, the more potential infection that comes into the area. So that's when we have to be a little more conscientious about when we think there might be an infectious disease when there are more horses at a bigger event.
Or if the disease might be something that would affect humans.
That's right, and that's very important. A lot of people you mentioned about how we didn't allow showing of poultry, and one of the risk factors in that is because the disease in poultry can potentially spread to people. And so that was one of the factors we have to think about. If we have something that crosses species lines, that's very concerning to us because it doesn't just affect horses or poultry or pigs, it affects more than one species.
Okay, well thank you very much, and thanks to you again to all of you that tuned in today. If you do have any questions about this topic, please let us know at Purdue Extension or reach out to the Board of Animal Health. There's some great resources online with both groups that can help answer your questions about your horse's health and well-being.